Hello and welcome to the eOrganic webinar on Scouting for Vegetable and Fruit Pests on Organic Farms by Helen Atthowe and Doug O'Brien. My name is Alice Formiga and I'm the webinar coordinator for eOrganic. eOrganic is the organic agriculture community of practice with eExtension. You can find all of our published articles, videos, and our many upcoming and recorded webinars on organic farming and research topics on our website at extension.org/organic_production. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. Helen Atthowe has been farming on her own and consulting for other organic vegetable and fruit farms for 25 years. She was a horticultural extension agent for 15 years and owned and operated Biodesign Farm, a 30-acre diverse organic fruit and vegetable farm in western Montana for 17 years. Doug O'Brien currently owns and operates Doug O'Brien Agricultural Consulting, providing on-site technical advice, field monitoring, and research for clients involved in fresh produce growing, harvesting, cooling, and marketing. He's also an adjunct professor at Cabrillo College in Santa Cruz, California, and teaches classes in organic farming. Previously, Doug was a co-owner of an organic produce brokerage company, a crop production manager, and an assistant farm advisor.
Welcome, everybody. This presentation is really about how to look, not what to do when you find. So we're looking at general and specific methods of observation. And it's really geared at farmers who want to do a better job of looking at their crops themselves, farmers who can't hire a consultant, they might be smaller or in short season, just have a wide diversity of crops. It's not really geared towards PCAs or pest control advisors because they have real larger fields that they can really monitor carefully and statistically. And so this is really a presentation for what to do when you really have more crop than you can look at as much as you would like. So lots of tips for doing that. Oops. See, my slides have, okay. Here we go. All right. So my first motto is the unexamined life is not worth living. And I always think that we need to examine what we're doing with our work to see if we can improve. So that's important. And then my second motto is I don't do much, but every once in a while I do something. And this reminds me that I can spend days on minor details wondering what it's all for. Then I suddenly see something that's exciting and saves thousands of dollars. And so sometimes it's kind of hard to keep it fresh because a lot of scouting is just seeing the same things over and over. And you've got to be ready for when things are different. Now, the complexity of organic farming means that we should not be multitasking. So that's my first piece of advice. If you're out to look at the crop, you can't also be planning your vacation. You can never hope to catch all that's going on, so why should you lower your odds? Second piece of advice, wherever you are, be there. So you can't be thinking about other stuff. Good observation is about focus. All right, some tips for being there. First of all, concentrate. If you get a phone call or someone talks to you, you want to stop walking. You want to deal with the call and then kind of re-enter the zone of observation. Again, if you're not careful, you'll lose focus. You need to expect the unexpected. I think that complacency is the most serious mistake besides incompetence. So you never know when something new is going to happen, something unexpected, something that has never been seen before, and you've got to be ready to observe it. But given that, you also need to expect the expected because you want to balance the unexpected with using your experience to tell you when to expect something and take extra time for observation. Many things occur in cycles, and knowing the cycles can help direct your observations. Now, this next slide is an overview of the rest of my talk. I'll be talking about the importance of keeping records, using objective criteria for when you're out observing. So putting a number to things, things like saying 10 out of 20 plants or 50% plants have aphids. Not some had aphids, some didn't. You want either a plant has an aphid or it doesn't. I'll be talking about objective versus subjective observations, using statistical samples, and then the evenness of distribution. Then finally, we'll talk about observing a field from different distances, from far away, from more nearby, and from close and from very close, where you're looking at individual leaves or buds or insects, and the importance of repeating it. So, on to records. So here's the typical bookshelf for one of my clients. In organic farming, if we don't learn from our mistakes, we're doomed to repeat them. So I keep all my farm reports, and I use them quite regularly. I look back and say, well, 3 years ago, we saw this at such and such a time. This year, we're seeing it 10 days later. All those things can be very important. We want to use objective criteria. So this slide is 5 years of monitoring cabbage aphids in Salinas. This is many, many hours of work. But as a result, we actually know exactly when to quit planting cauliflower and when we can start again. And incredibly important, tens of thousands of dollars saved by having this information. And we used objective criteria to get there. And statistical samples. So here's an example of a statistical sample where we have 10 garlic cloves. We found that 8 of them had green tips and 2 of them did not, and so that gives us 80% green tip and 20% without green tip. So to get a statistical sample, we have to look at enough of the crop and the plants to be reasonably sure it's representative of the whole group. And we have to understand and be okay with our chance of an error. For example, if you sample 5 plants, you actually have a 20% chance of missing something. Now, in practice, you can probably fudge a bit because along with the 5 plants you may have examined, you've probably actually glanced at hundreds. Well, how many plants should you look at? I think usually 5 is too little. 10 is a number that I follow quite a lot, sometimes 20. But remember that rapidly reproducing organisms like aphids and some diseases, or stuff where there's a low tolerance, or when I'm paying particular attention to a problem to develop a threshold, I might look at as many as 50 plants, which will give me a 2% chance of error. The other thing is that using objective and criteria and statistical samples means you can develop thresholds, and these are levels that trigger some sort of action, which can be really important. And the threshold varies with the field and the time of year and the crop. And a good example of this would be with one of my clients with imported cabbage worm, which is a caterpillar that can do some significant damage and is also quite a bad contaminant sometimes that you really don't want in the packed out product. And we know that in cabbage, if we really don't do anything if the infestation is less than 20%. It's a lot of cabbage worms running around, but they, in the organic situation that we have, those will clean up before harvest and they won't do enough damage to really reduce the yield. And that works every month but June, but sometimes in June that the cabbage worm is too aggressive and we do have to do some sprays. If the crop is broccoli, 5% will trigger some kind of action because the cabbage worm get inside the broccoli heads and then become a contaminant at harvest. And if it's June, any sign of imported cabbage worm might lead to some control just because they get so out of control in that particular month. And what I find that if you do actual counts, it really forces you to pay attention. And that's why I really recommend that we do counts and not just kind of looking and making a sort of a non-counting estimate. Now, the evenness of distribution. One of the most common difficulties of being confident in your sample is because things are not distributed evenly. This is especially true on organic farms that might have a lot of different crops and hedgerows and things going on. The fields are big. Some things come in on the prevailing wind. Some are associated with particular features on borders and things like that. So in practice, the only way you can get around this is to inspect regularly and vary the spot that you inspect. It's really important to observe from different distances. People sometimes seem just a little too anxious to jump into the field and start looking at individual plants right away. But I think it's important to start out looking far. So far as many plants. You're at the edge of the field, and you scan the whole field as you approach. You're looking for abnormalities, areas of pale, less dense vegetation, odd colors, things like that. Now you want to make sure that your field walk takes you into the abnormal areas, but you don't want to focus on them exclusively because you might miss something that doesn't show up in the far view. All right, so where should we enter the field? Well, it's really important to vary the entry spots. If you're not careful, you'll get in the habit of always coming in on the same spot. It may be a road or something that just really makes access easy, but you've got to resist that tendency and make sure you come in from different spots all the time. You want to take basically the load less traveled, and it will make all the difference. When should you observe? Now this is nice for farmers because really high noon is the best because shadows and low light make it difficult to observe things. High noon is uncomfortable because it's hot, but it is a nice time, and a lot of the time for farmers who've been very busy dealing with the farm in the morning, they can start scouting in around noon. All right, how often? Well, you want to match the frequency of your observation to the soil temperature because everything happens faster when it's warm and slower when it's cold. So basically in midsummer you can't scout often enough, but in winter you might get by with once or twice a week. And then we come to cutting corners, okay? You can't look at everything, and so experience, intuition, and really the economic value of a field will tell you what you can take a chance on. So you need to have a kind of a plan with the idea that if I'm too busy, I will skip looking at this today, but I'll make sure I catch it the next day. And so when I'm doing my field observations and those kinds of things happen, I do try and let the farmer know which field I didn't look at. So that at least they know that that field wasn't looked at carefully, and if they have time, they'll go and see it, or they'll remind me to pay particular attention to it the next time I'm out. And then you want to repeat. So as you're walking through the field, or as I'm walking through the field, I scan far to look, to the far end. Then I'm looking closer, and then I may be bending down and looking at things very close to my eyes. And I do that over and over with the idea that each step that you do gives you 3 new views. So it's a very active process. It's not just head down and walking. It's really, it's almost like driving a car. You're always looking in your rear view mirror, in front, and to the side. All right, so we've talked about looking far. The next is looking near. And looking near is basically what you see when you're looking down when you're standing up. It might be 5 or 10 plants. Okay, so which plants should you look at? Well, it really depends. Should it be the biggest plants or the smallest? Well, we want to look at both. The smallest may be sick. The biggest can get diseases and insects first. To tell you the truth, I usually find that the biggest plants are the ones that are kind of the ones that are the indicators of what may be changing in a field. The walking pattern and how far into the field. Well, this is a huge topic. Best would be a diagonal or an X or a W or something like that. But again, we're talking about farmers who have too much crop to really look at it and go from end to end in the field. So, and the other thing is that it's actually practically pretty impossible to do a diagonal or an X when the plants are pretty small because you can get to the point where you really just can't step over them anymore. So here's what I do. Usually I look at some of the edge plants on the field. Then I walk in about a pipe's length, 20 feet, 30 feet, and then I go down and across the rows. Sometimes I might walk to the center of the field, down 1 row, over a few rows, and back. And this is not statistical. You're going to miss things this way, but when you're in a hurry, this is really the fastest way, I think, to get the best chance of observing what's really going on. Then the third observational view is looking close. So this really is, you know, almost once you think you've found something, or to gather your actual statistical sample of 5 or 10 or 20 plants. So this is what I call looking close. I like to use a stainless steel vegetable knife, and I like to chop into things and grab pieces of whatever I'm looking at. Other scouts use a shovel, which lets you look at a lot of soil and roots. But if you do use a shovel, you want to get the kid's size because it's too heavy to carry with you. And quite frankly, I find a shovel too awkward to bring with me, and so I use my knife as a makeshift shovel a lot of the time. Really important to have your reading glasses handy because you're going to be looking up close. And I like a hand lens, but I don't like too much magnification, because if there's too much magnification, it just takes too long to scan the leaf. And if there's too little, of course, you're going to miss things. Clothing. I think it's important to have boots and rain gear in the car or in the truck. If you don't have them, you will not go into a wet field properly, and sometimes you do have to go into a wet field. Important to have sun protection. A hat brim will protect you from glare. I don't really like sunglasses very much unless they have really good optics, because I feel like you do miss some things with sunglasses. Now, what are you looking at when you're looking close? Well, you're looking at leaves. The undersides are really important. If you don't flip the leaf over, you'll never see all the important things that are going on underneath. And then the internal leaves of heading crops like broccoli, lettuce, cauliflower, things like that. The growing tips is where a lot of the things that could go wrong are happening. And so you really want to be looking at those kinds of things, and it does take some extra effort to look at them. And again, I like using my knife. I like to bring the growing tip to me rather than bend over to look at the growing tip. So when I go through a field, there's a lot of slashing with my knife and a lot of plants that will never reach harvest. But I find that by physically handling it as much as I can, I'm really getting a better observation. And you also need to remember that most of the action is on either old or young leaves. The medium-sized leaves aren't the ones that are going to show a lot of signs of things going wrong. You know, and buds are also where a lot of stuff is happening, and so you want to be looking at them. People neglect roots because you have to dig them up, but you'll miss stuff if you don't look at roots. And you want to be able to split them open and look inside. So again, another good reason to have a knife with you. So here's an example of sampling to estimate aphid infestation, and I do this a lot because aphids are one of our major pests, and there are some things we can do for them, but especially in organic, we need to catch them pretty early. So this is 20 half heads. So I would score these as either having aphid or not having aphid. So if there's even one aphid in the head, it scores for aphid. And if it doesn't have an aphid, then it doesn't score. And then I can tell the farmer, you know, 2 out of 20 of the half heads had aphids. And so that is valuable information. Probably that's not a tolerance that very many buyers are going to be very happy with, because if 2 of your 20 customers go home with a significant amount of aphids in their heads of broccoli, they're not going to come back to you. If it's early enough, there are some things we can do. If it's late, we can pay particular attention during harvest and packing to screen out the majority of those aphid-infested heads, because there are some signs that a head will be infested that don't require you to cut it in half. So this is a really valuable number, and I do this you know, day after day, week after week for a whole bunch of different crops. And if I just go out there and say, you know, the aphids are light, the aphids are heavy, or it seemed like there were a few aphids, or it seemed like there weren't, the farmer doesn't have something that he can really work with. something where he can make a decision about how much risk he wants to take, how much effort he wants to put in to overcome the problem, doesn't give enough information to really make a good informed farming decision. It's expensive and it's time consuming to gather this kind of data, but I think we found over the years it's just so valuable to have these numbers so that we can, over time, compare them, see what happened, you know, when we did a control measure when we had 20%, did we get control, or was it too late? All those kinds of things go into sort of the experience knowledge base that over time makes you a much better farmer and actually makes you a much better person scouting. So again, I can't stress too much. Putting a number on things is really important. If you only have time, maybe you'll only look at 5 plants and you'll have a 20% chance of making an error. But at least you have a number, at least you have something that you can go back and compare. So it all sounds really easy, but it's not. I'm really glad I don't have any artichokes to scout this year. They get to be about 8 feet tall. Scouting in this jungle is virtually impossible unless you have a big enough field to make it worthwhile to walk from end to end kind of with a machete. So that's something to be aware of. Tall crops and staked crops, when they're staked, you can't get around them because you can't get over the stakes. And so that means you're really walking up and down rows, which is a lot less effective than walking across rows. And then you also have other barriers. One of the ones I really hate is polyester row covers. They're bad because you really shouldn't be walking over them because you'll tear them, and then you have to look under them. And it's so difficult to scout under polyester covers. And when I really need to, I get on my hands and knees and I just go up and down and across the beds. It's really hot in there. It's really uncomfortable, but someone has to do it. And probably the reason I was hired was so the farmer wouldn't, and I can come up with at least some sort of idea of what's going on under these barriers. And they're also a problem because certain insect pests like aphids thrive under barriers, and if you don't scout them properly, you can have a problem that gets out of hand really quickly. We lost a field of radishes just this spring where I didn't look carefully under some polyester cover, and we couldn't control the radishes in time for harvest, or couldn't control the aphids in time for harvest, so we lost them. So if you're scouting these polyester barriers, you just got to realize there are times when you just got to get down on your hands and knees and scuttle underneath and look at stuff, and there's really no way around it. All right, that's my part. I'm going to pass over to Helen.
Hello, good. I have to say that I agree with everything that Doug has said, which is kind of unique for Doug and I. I basically look in very much the same way he does, and over the last so that I've been scouting, my looking has evolved, and this is what I do now. I also look at about 10 plants. I look at 1 to 10 leaves per plant, and I will look at more leaves if I'm learning what's going on in the field, and less leaves if I think I know what I'm going on. Then I use that leaf sample to calculate the number of pests and predators per leaf. Here are my tools of the trade. I use a much bigger hand lens than I did 30 years ago as my eyesight is gone. Sometimes I use 2 counters because I forget what I'm counting or what I've already counted. Still, though, the records really haven't changed. I definitely keep that keep those check-offs as you muted there on my little notebook and make sure that I get it done and that I have something to go back to. So as I'm calculating the number of pests and injury per leaf or per plant, I'm also then using that to figure out whether we've reached a threshold. Doug talked a little bit about that, and threshold is basically whether we've gotten to a level that's going to cost me or the farm that I'm working with. It's often called economic damage. And that can actually vary from farm to farm. So my farms, the farm that I worked for 17 years and the farm I'm on now, our marketing is mainly through farmers markets. A much larger farm I worked with in Colorado, we did a lot of wholesale to supermarkets and big supermarkets, and our tolerance level was, well, basically zero tolerance. So thresholds really changed. And over time, I've developed different thresholds for different crops and different farms and different times of the year. But in the beginning, I've used other people's thresholds. So here are some examples for cabbage worms. So for example, on cabbage, you have Doug's threshold level there, and you have the University of Minnesota's 35%. I have tended to use the 35% myself. On Brussels sprouts, I used the Pacific Northwest threshold for many, many years until in 2007 we received a Western SARE grant, and we got to look very closely at our pest predator system, including this threshold, and we realized on this farm in this location in Montana that we could get away with a much higher threshold. But that was a different system, and we'll talk more about that over time. We'll have some articles on that on eOrganic. So thresholds and degree day models. By degree day models, I mean models that have been created with lots of research on specific pests that are weather-based, so we can tell when pests are going to emerge and when they may be problematic based on these models. And I've used these models to help develop thresholds on my specific farms and the farms I've been working for. If you're going to go out and start doing this, the best place to begin is to talk to your state's Extension Integrated Pest Management people for the kinds of information, degree day models, thresholds that they have. That's definitely the place to start. And here are a couple of the places that I have utilized over the years as I've developed thresholds for my farm. Thresholds are also really, really important to include predators and parasites, for me anyway. Most of the scouting that we have done on our farms has involved figuring out whether or not we have enough predators and parasites to actually make a difference with the pest population. So I count as many predators and parasites as I do pests. And this aphid ratio here that you see in front of you on the slide is one of the first predator thresholds that we developed. And it has worked really well for us. And in fact, over time on both farms, the one in Montana and the farm I'm on now in California, aphids have become almost a non-pest. We certainly monitor for them, but the predator and parasite numbers are so high that it's not something that we treat for. There are some research-based models for pest and predator available out there, really good for predatory mites. There's quite a bit of information out there if you're dealing with mites. So here's what I love to see. When I'm out scouting, I look in the same place for my predators and parasites that I'm looking for my pests. And when I turn the leaf of a pepper plant over and I see parasitized aphid and predator, in this case a cestromyid fly larva, attacking aphids and not too many aphids, then I'm pretty happy and ready to say, we probably don't need to do anything about the aphids there. So that's one easy example, the aphids. I want to talk about some what I consider to be more challenging pests, and in some ways more challenging to scout for. So a pest that some of my farms that I've been working with have is an onion thrip. And so what's the threshold? Well, because I'm still gaining that experience that Doug was talking about, I've gone to the literature and we see, okay, well, a threshold looks like about 30 thrips per plant, but less thrips if indeed you have a thrip susceptible variety. So that sends me to the literature to find out, well, what are people finding are the susceptible varieties and what are the highly tolerant varieties to onion thrips. And that in turn sends me still scurrying to some of the physiological data to say, okay, but are there relationships between the number of thrips and perhaps diseases like virus that they can transmit and yields? So I put all of that together, and here's some good data that I've been able to find to figure out what might be an onion thrip threshold that I'd start with and then begin to gain my own experience. So here's another example with western flower thrips, which is the only main pest that we have on our new farm, my new farm. Woodleaf Farm has been around for about 35 years. And so they've been looking at thrips, and I have taken over, and we're considering at this point that about 1 thrip per leaf is our economic threshold. However, we're now this year adding this pest-prey ratio, and very excitedly we're finding all of these wonderful predators of thrips. So here's my list that we've been looking at, and as you can see, I have added early to mid and mid to late. This is when this particular predator is the most active. And that's really important because, as I'll show you in a minute, we want to know who we can depend on when. But I do want to point out here my new favorite predator, which is the predatory thrip, the 6-spotted thrip. I hadn't really spent much time with these guys in Montana, but they are gobbling up thrips in Northern California and kind of replacing in my heart my favorite minute pirate bug that was a big predator on my farm. So you want to get friendly with your predator complex, and I want to show you what that means. So I don't have this data yet for Woodleaf Farm in California, but I have about 17 years of this data in Montana, and you can see that we have different peaks of predator activity, and so I put this all together into my predator complex, and that will let me know when to expect certain predators to become really prolific and maybe kick in activity. And you can see, looking at that yellow line, which is minute pirate bug, why minute pirate bug is my old favorite predator. Very effective late in the season. So I thought with my last example, I would start with the very beginning. If you have a pest and you want to set up a scouting program, where do you start? How do you start doing that? You definitely have to already be doing Doug's looking. That's key. But you have to also, I think, get some information. So flea beetles are a pest that perhaps some of you out there might have. It's been a #1 pest for a bunch of the farms that I'm working with. So I went and looked for flea beetle life cycle. #1, I want to know when to expect them at different stages. And #2, I want to be able to identify every stage very well when I'm out in the field, from larva to pupa to the adult stage, because that's really part of my looking. I need to know what I'm looking at. So then with this life cycle information, when do I monitor and how do I start to think about what threshold level to start with? Well, with flea beetles, again, the experience here is on the young side for me, but basically what we're finding out is that you start ASAP. As soon as you put in a transplant, or as soon as the seeds come out of the ground and are at cotyledon stage, you start monitoring for flea beetles. And at this point, I'm going to have to be relatively cautious and say that I go with this threshold level that I found from Cornell, which is 1 beetle per plant at cotyledon or seedling stage. So not much room yet with flea beetles, but we are finding a number of predators of flea beetles, which is exciting. Lacewing larvae and these big-eyed bugs, which are good thrips predators too, and our generalist predator, our ground beetles, the carabid beetle. So we do have some predators that we can look for, as well as our flea beetles. And of course, my always new and old favorite predator, spiders. I am so excited about how much spiders are really getting done. I always paid attention to them in my predator complex, but they tended to be consistent throughout the whole season, but not huge peaks like that minute pirate bug. So they weren't flashy. And now I'm realizing how much work they're actually getting done. And my goal for 2013 is to be able to identify all of these spiders that I'm finding to at least genus level and hopefully species level. So if anybody can help me with that, I would be up for some good spider ID lessons. On a final note, I want to say that something else that I monitor or have been monitoring over the last 18 years or so is weeds. And both of my farms are farms where we have a very high tolerance of weeds. But I want to say that I think it's important to keep a record at least of your dominant species, and if you have time, to measure actually how much cover they're taking up. I think that's important too. So this is the tool that I use. It's basically PVC pipes put together into a 1 meter squared measure, and that allows us to really look at how the weed populations are changing over the season and where they have been bad in what fields if you do nothing else. I think it's important to go into your rotation planning the next year saying, oh yeah, that was a weedy field. Okay, we better think about that. So there's my plug for, along with all the notes that you're keeping on insects and diseases and predators and parasites, to also keep some really good notes on what weed species seem to be becoming problematic or dropping out, or, wow, I've never seen that one before, what's it doing? Again, sometimes we don't know what information we need to keep until we 10 years later say, oh, wow, that would have been great to know. And so my motto is count everything. And I basically have the obsessive-compulsive approach to scouting. Doug goes through really quickly and has these scouting tips and shortcuts was his term. And I'm in a position at this point where the only thing I get paid for scouting on the farm where I am now is peaches. So I spend hours scouting. That's not what I've done in the past, certainly not what I've done on larger farms, but if you have the ability to do that, the more records you keep, the better. So I want to end with saying that Doug and I both totally agree, and I think any
Unmuted.
scouting person that you'll find will agree that the key to good scouting is to look regularly and to keep consistent records. And with that, I think we can turn it over to discussion, because I'm sure everybody else has lots of experience too. And I wanted to end with this recent photograph I took of brassicas in California, where we were starting to get a whole bunch of cabbage aphids, and look who's moved in, a huge percentage of parasitized aphids. So with that note, shall we go to discussion.
First question, can you recommend a good field guide which shows all the life stages for pests, or perhaps also a good online resource?
Doug, you want to go?
Well, I like the University of California Natural Enemies Handbook.
Okay, and I've been in both Colorado and Montana, and so I really like Whitney Cranshaw's, basically all of his books and all of his publications from the University of Colorado. Great photos, and I really like the California book as well. And I've used some online stuff from Washington State University and from Oregon State University. And also California. In fact, you probably noticed in my presentation that I had photographs from Oregon State photographers and from University of California. We probably couldn't do integrated pest management without the University of California, huh, Doug?
That's true. And the issue, though, often is that different farms and different locations have a different predator, parasite, beneficial insect mix. And so you want to be careful not to get hung up on something that's minor and really focus on the ones that are, you know, you're doing the real workhorses of controlling whatever pest it is you have.
Boy, I really agree strongly with that one.
Okay, we have a question on what information you think should be collected in a scouting check program on a list, on a checklist.
Doug, I'm going to jump in there first, and then I'm sure you have some ideas. That is such an excellent question, and a year ago I thought I knew the answer to that. But one thing that we're doing now, which I want to say is really exciting, and you'll see a lot more on eOrganic about it, we have a Western SARE grant to do farm system analysis case studies on 6 long-term, what I'm calling eco-organic farms, and I've been collecting their records for the last year, looking at my records from the different farms that I've worked with, and I'm really changing my ideas about what is important. But I think that definitely you want to look at pest dynamics. So what are your insect pests? What are your diseases? As I told you, think weeds are important, predators and parasites. And boy, you know, I just want to put in a plug that I didn't pay attention to enough, but along with that, to maintain maps and a rotation history, as well as what inputs you're adding to the soil and your soil tests. So I know I've just made it really complex, but I'm finding as we go through all of this data from these case farms that I'm saying, oh man, if we just had that information from 1998 through 2000, we might be able to figure out the answer to this. So there's my plea, more records the better. Doug, how fewer records can we take?
Well, I don't think my clients would be happy with anything more than a one-page ranch report for each of my scouting days. And so that's all I do. I keep it down to a page. I don't have an entry for every crop. If there's nothing that's really going on, I just put down something like no significant new problems and just leave it at that. So my feeling is that you should only keep the level of records that you're really going to use. So you don't want to gather more data than you can actually use. And I think that's, you know, pretty important. Farming is a very complicated business. There's only a certain amount of time that can be spent on this stuff every day. And so my rule of thumb is try and keep it simple, try and keep it important. Don't tell people things they already know. And then I also do, I broke it down once and I realized that I spend actually 30% of my scouting looking at crop quality and making harvest estimates. So it's kind of interesting to see what you do spend your time on. The insect stuff is pretty big. Diseases is often really quite small. Weeds is often quite a minor portion of what I talk about. So, you know, For me, I need to find out what my client really cares about and give it to them in the most concise and priority level that they can handle, and no more detail than they want to read, which is a page or less.
I just want to add quickly, too, that Doug and I are working on an article for eOrganic on scouting, and I planned on putting in that article the charts that I take into the field, so that I have a template with me that shows me what I'm going to look at. And again, that should be up on eOrganic in the future here. If anybody's really dying for that, that I could probably make that available somehow. I might, let me think about how I could make that available. I think I could put it up on my website, which is veganicpermaculture.com, and maybe we can figure some other way to have that chart in in some of the webinar archive here. But anyway, I forgot to mention what Doug said too, that yeah, crop quality is something that I look at, leaf color and what the fruit looks like or what the rest of the crop looks like.
Helen, we can upload your chart to the page where the webinar recording will be, if you like, as well, along with some of the other resources that you've recommended for pest identification. And we kind of in line with that, we have about 3 questions which are all asking for recommended resources on how to learn more about predators, parasites, beneficial insects that suppress things like flea beetles, cucumber beetles, aphids, and thrips. So if you could talk about those as well.
Well, eOrganic has a really wonderful article on cucumber beetle predators. That's Bill Snyder's article, and you can get that at eOrganic. I think the places that Doug and I were just talking about, the University of California publications, Colorado State University publications, Washington State, Oregon State, Cornell. I just happen to be a Westerner, so I'm talking about those. But also, wherever you are, go to your extension service and ask for the Integrated Pest Management Program, and they will, many states have wonderful websites, and they'll be able to give you a lot of information about different parasites and predators in your area.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about the best methods for controlling flea beetles? It's the questioner said they're terrible here in Maine, and she has to plant many crops under row covers.
Doug, I'm going to let you start on that one.
Yeah, you know, if your crop is not sensitive to overhead irrigation, I find a daily irrigation of about a half an hour really stops flea beetles from doing a lot of damage. If that's not practical, paying attention to what was growing before is really important, because they hatch out of the soil. So if you had a flea beetle susceptible crop and then you plant another maybe different crop, but one that's susceptible to the same flea beetle nearby or directly on top, you're going to have a much worse problem. So you want to kind of pay attention to that. You can vacuum them up. It requires going over the field at least twice, preferably 3 times. And you want to do it one after another, so you don't do it 3 times a day. You go over it 3 times all in one go. It seems like the vacuums disturb them enough that they're easier to vacuum up if you keep at it. Pesticides organically aren't very effective. Row covers are, but have lots of problems, of course. And if there's any gaps, you know, the flea beetles can get in, and then they thrive quite nicely in there. I haven't had much luck with predators and parasites of them when they're really bad. And so the other thing that you sometimes have to do is find out when they're going to be the worst, and you don't grow susceptible crops at that time. Probably difficult in Maine, where you've got a short growing season, but certainly we in California avoid certain times of the year when we know the flea beetles are going to be pretty bad.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I just wanted to add that remember that there are flea beetles of different, different plant families. So there's crucifer flea beetles and there's solanaceous flea beetles, and so rotating out of those crops can help. But the work we did in Colorado, we found that the flea beetles could move huge distances, and so that's good in the beginning and not so great later in the season. Row covers were very effective. Mulches were somewhat effective in terms of having having habitat for some of the predators. I do have to say that on the farms where they have used living mulches or mulches, over time there was a decrease in flea beetle population. So I'm kind of excited about that. And again, one of the reasons that I'm paying more attention to spiders, there does seem to be an interest in spiders doing more with flea beetles too. However, if you've got big fields and lots of bare soil, it's going to be a real problem. I do want to say that in Colorado we had some pretty good success, and there are some experiments that seem to indicate that entrust was somewhat more effective than many of the other things that at least the farmers I've been working with had been spraying. And again, that's not the direction that I've been going in myself. And I think a whole systems approach to flea beetles is really going to be key. And I also don't know how to not use row cover as part of that system.
Okay, yeah, we just got a comment pretty much echoing what you said, which was flea beetles like hot bare soils, so living in dead mulches can help. Here's a question, I guess this is for you, Helen, about if you could just talk more about why the weed count is important.
Yeah, can I just say something too to that commenter? I wonder if that commenter has any data on that. I'm just collecting the data, some actual data on flea beetles diminishing with both living and dead mulches. And so if there's any more data, I would offer you the best peaches in California to get it. And now the question was, I'm so sorry, Alice, I've forgotten.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, so it was back to the weed count and why that's important.
Oh, yes. Oh, my goodness. Okay. So you're coming down to, August, and all of a sudden you have a field that has weeds that the deadly duo, the red root pigweed and lamb's quarters, and they're as tall as you are, and you say, oh my goodness, how did this happen? How did this get so out of control? What could we have done to avoid that? And you go back and you look at the rotation history and you say, oh, I see. We have a failure of rotation. We also maybe screwed up in our pre-plant weed management. But if I have a history of what weeds were present when in what fields, just generally, it helps me to see in my climate, with my soil, with my crop rotation, and the way I do things for my market, where the weak points might be. And otherwise, I spend a lot of money going back and saying, oh, well, it must be that I didn't do this properly. The more data I have, the more I can get at these big systems approach problems and answers, if that makes any sense at all.
Can I comment on that?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the really important things about knowing how bad your weeds are is when it comes to planting a cover crop, because you can choose different seeding rates of cover crops, and if you know you have a bad weed problem because you measured it, in advance of that cover crop, you may decide to spend a little more money and up your seeding rate and use that to outcompete the weeds. So I think that's one of the most practical uses of having a weed count.
That's an excellent point, and Doug didn't mention too that sometimes on their farm they actually go through and tine weed their cover crop to make sure that there's no weeds. And there's different ways of planting the cover crop in terms of, going, instead of just going once through the field, splitting your seed and going horizontally, diagonally, in different directions to fill in all of those niches. So thank you, Doug. That's a really good point.
This is a question for Helen. How did you go about creating the graph of predator insect population?
Oh, that's a really good question. So I want to make sure that I give Western Sayre credit for that. We started just doing sweeps, and then we got some money to actually have some help, and I had a student out there, and we did. The year that we created that particular graph, we did sweeps and we had pitfall traps as well. But mostly what we do and have done for years and years is have a net and do sweeps within, I tend to use a 10-foot area because it makes sense in terms of my row cropping, but mainly sweeps.
Okay. Here is a question about how you became scouts. Did you go to school to learn about all the pests, or did you just learn on the job?
Go ahead, Doug.
Well, I got an ag degree, and so that was very helpful for just, generally knowing what was important and what wasn't. But no, I'd say I mostly learned on the job and learned through trial and error. And what was really most important to me was actually listening to what the farmers wanted to know and what was really important to them. Because you can generate a lot of information walking a farm, but you've really got to screen out the stuff that's not important. So I think it's really important to have a very good working knowledge of insects, diseases, weeds. You can get with a basic ag or ag degree from a college or a university. And then it's all really just practice and also trying to find someone who knows what they're doing and tag along with them, which has also been pretty helpful for me.
Ditto. Basically, I did the same thing as Doug, but I got to, right out of graduate school, I worked with the Integrated Pest Management program at Rutgers University, and I got to learn lots and lots working as an IPM scout. So that's why I really recommend talking to your local IPM program folks.
Here's a question related again to resources. This person had a hard time identifying some pests in the past and has heard that there's a new IPM iPhone app for identifying pests. So if anyone's familiar with that, maybe you could type in the comment box maybe what it is or your experience with that type of thing. Meanwhile, is drip irrigation better or overhead watering better for controlling pests, in your opinion?
Boy, I think drip. Go ahead, Doug.
I think it depends entirely on the system. Yeah, I don't think there's any real general rule, but certainly for instance, if you're growing broccoli and flea beetles is your problem, you definitely want to be overhead irrigating. The overhead irrigation discourages the flea beetles much better than the drip would. On the other hand, with drip irrigation, often you can keep your plants a little bit healthier and more, they have more water. They're perhaps a little more resistant to pest infestation. Some dry crops, for instance, the brassica family, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli, I think get worse cabbage aphid when they're dry. And so I think they actually do better on drip if you maybe are not giving them enough water frequently enough with the overhead irrigation. So to me, it depends entirely on the system you're working with. And unfortunately, there's no real rule of thumb, and everyone is going to be different. So Yeah.
In farms where I have worked with both, I feel that the benefits of drip outweigh the benefits of being able to wash the insect, like thrips too. Thrips and even mites don't seem to do as well with moisture and can be mitigated somewhat with precipitation or irrigation. But I really agree with what Doug said in terms of drip doing such a nice job for the crop.
Okay, and here's a question about whether you have any experience with whether organic paper mulch is good for controlling pests. And also, I just wanted to say that was our last question at the moment. So if any of you who are still on have additional questions, we do still have some time to answer more. So you can take advantage of having Doug and Helen on the line. So I'd encourage you to type in more questions. And meanwhile, back to paper mulch.
I have no experience with paper mulch.
I have only 1 year experience with paper mulch, but that, I have to say, was a year in which we did another study, an Organic Farming Research Foundation grant in 2007, where we looked at different methods of weed management in a reduced tillage system, and that basically we found that the plants grew really well with the paper mulch, but we also were not able to see really any differences in pest management in just 1 year.
Okay, let's see. We do have a few last-minute questions coming in. That's good. We have some nice comments and greetings from South Africa.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's exciting. And here's another question about, let's see, additional questions about online resources for IDing insects and disease. I know the Pacific Northwest Handbook is very good, but if you can recommend any others that you haven't already mentioned, we'll certainly be posting some on this webinar page, since there seems to be a lot of interest in recommendations of additional resources. So we will collect some and post those with the webinar recording. But if you can recommend any other resources for identifying diseases of vegetable crops, let us know.
Yeah, well, you want to be really careful with disease diagnosis, because a lot of the time you actually can't see the organism that's causing the damage, and it can get very confusing and difficult to just try and match pictures. So I do want to caution people with diagnosing their own diseases. Very often, if it's an important one, you're better off to take it to your local extension agent who has access to things like electron microscopes, which might be useful. So, but otherwise, in California, our UCIPM, so if you just web searched UCIPM, you would find an entire site with almost all the diseases and pests and weeds that we have in California, with good color pictures of them. And that would certainly be a good place to start.
And for me, that I have also used the UC California sites and all of their publications. However, I really want to caution what Doug just touched on, that if we have someone in Maine, for example, and South Africa, that it's so key to go to your state and talk to your pest management people and say, okay, so what are our pests and what are our resources? Because when I worked as an extension agent in Montana, people would come into me and say, or they'd call and say, we've got this pest, and you know, they found it on the internet and it only occurs in South Africa. And it certainly didn't occur in Montana. So there's lots of resources out there, especially on the internet, but it's so key to go to the people that work in your local area and find out what in general the local pests are first.
This person was wondering specifically for the Southeast if there were any good resources.
Yeah, I don't know.
I think we can answer that question. We'd have to, I'm so unfamiliar with the Southeast, although I did farm in Georgia when I was more than 30 years ago. We will get that on the page that Alice is talking about, because there are some good resources. They just aren't coming to mind.
One that two
North
people
Carolina.
have. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Oh, I was just going to say, I thought North Carolina state has some pretty good stuff.
And I think Georgia does, and Alabama. I mean, I think there is a lot. There's a lot of IPM. There are a lot of integrated pest management folks doing some really good work down there. It's just not my part of the world, so it's not right on the top of my head.
Another one that two people have recommended in the comment box was diseases and pests of vegetable crops in Canada. Not specifically for the Southeast, but as a good resource on diseases.
Good.
Yeah, those are good.
Okay, here's another question about whether a scout is a specialized job that farmers hire for specifically. And if someone wanted to become one, if they don't go to ag school, would it be a good idea to try to work on a farm for a couple of years?
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to work on the farm, because really one of the most important things with scouting, as I kind of mentioned before, is only giving the farmer the information they want and not wasting their time with stuff they don't want. And you'll learn what they want by being a farmer yourself, probably more than any other experience you might get. You know, organic scouting is kind of interesting, because we don't have a lot of effective pesticides. So very often when we find something, it's not as simple as hooking up a spray rig and dealing with it, which is the way it is in conventional farming. And conventional farms often have larger blocks of crops, which means they can actually hire vertically integrated companies that come with their own scouts, their own spray rigs, their own associated pesticide companies. So they go and deal with the problem in that way, and in that way only. Organic is much different, where there's a range of strategies, some of them very long-term, some of them whole farm, that you might need to follow. And so it's a very specialized field, but I think it's one that more farmers are going to start taking advantage of as they realize the benefits to developing things over time to reduce their risks, because so much money involved. Reducing your risk is really where it's at a lot of the time in farming, and having crop scouts who maybe can't instantly solve your problem today, but can work on a program that will reduce it tomorrow, I think are going to be popular in the future.
That's exactly what I keep talking about when I use the term systems approach. So I completely agree with that. I wanted to add that how I got into scouting was to actually get a summer job as an IPM field scout, and I'm going to just assume that most programs in the United States are still hiring students to be field scouts, and that's a great way to learn to scout.
Here's a question about how this person would find out if there are existing SARE or other research projects that want data collected from small farms. How could a farmer get connected with research projects?
Ooh, where is this farmer located?
I don't know. If you can type that in, let us know.
If they're located in the West, we want to talk to you.
Okay.
Outside of the West, you know what? I think we still want to talk to you.
Well, actually, this is in Albany, New York.
Okay. Collect their contact information, and we will talk to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Let's see. All right. There's a few more questions here. How do you access and tabulate all your observations to look for patterns? You could talk more about that.
Doug has a smartphone.
Yeah, I enter everything actually using the microphone on my smartphone now, and that's been helpful. But The problem is I have 15 years of records that are just on pieces of paper that I wrote out manually, and so I just have kept them filed very carefully, and I have a reasonably good memory, and so I can actually go back and fairly quickly find a particular day of any particular year and look through my records that way. But I think with smartphone technology and tablets and things like that, we're going to be able to keep a lot of this information at our fingertips, and we're going to be able to categorize it. But to tell you the truth, I don't have a program yet or any sort of special thing that I'm using to keep track of what I'm gathering.
I have come up with these templates, these scouting forms that could be, that obviously is on my computer, and I have not made the technological jump to actually collect that in the field so that it goes right onto a tablet or a smartphone, but it certainly could. I just haven't gotten there yet. However, what I do is to try and get that data entered, the data that's collected in the field, put right into the form ASAP. So I've got a digital version, and I have to tell you, after spending the last year going through 15 to 35 years of farm records, that boy, the easier you can make it in terms of digitalizing things as soon as possible. Not everybody has Doug's memory, and it's really hard if it's not digital to go through all that paperwork.
Okay, we have a few comments coming in. One is that if farmers are interested in SARE research, each state has a SARE coordinator, and there's also a national SARE database that you can search for by state and find out what specific issues are being worked on. Also, in Albany, New York, someone recommended that they should contact Cornell Cooperative Extension, and they can also link you to researchers. And then another person recommended some resources for IPM in the southeastern United States. For example, the Southern Region IPM Center based in North Carolina, and also the ACES website, which I typed into the chat box, so you can all see that. And so, unfortunately, we are running out of time. And I'd like to thank everyone for your questions and mention once again that you can find our many other recorded presentations on organic farming topics at the link on your screen.